Hi, I'm Dikembe Mutombo. I believe that American democracy should represent a fair election around the country and around the world, encouraging voter participation in the elections and educate voters about the elections and their voting rights. We must fight voter suppression and obstacles that make voting difficult for the people of color. We know that special interest groups often use social media for fundraising, conducting public awareness, contributing to the political campaigns. But social media must be used responsibly. It should not be used to demonize the opposition candidate or misleading the public or spread some false information. Furthermore, in democratic society, equality means that all individuals are valued equally. You have equal opportunities and might be discriminated against. These are American democratic, or America should be represented at home and abroad.
Hi, I'm former Senator Jeff Flake. This is a panel on the future of Africa. And so pleased today to be joined by a wonderful panel of experts here. Representative Karen Bass has been involved in Africa for as long as I can remember being on Capitol Hill. I've had the good fortune of traveling with her in Africa and seeing the dedication that she brings to her job, chairing the Africa subcommittee, for example, for so long and being so involved in these efforts. Cindy McCain needs no introduction. Her involvement in humanitarian and other work around the globe are certainly well known and recognized most recently, if you've heard the news, at the likely appointment by the Biden administration to work, and we'll let Cindy talk about that if she wants to. Also, Ben Affleck. I've been acquainted with the work that he's done. We often bristle sometimes in Congress when Hollywood stars come and testify on this issue or that. But with Ben Affleck, we know that he knows what he's talking about, and he has put in time and resources and effort into this and become a real expert on these issues, and can lend some good, obviously, advocacy work in all that he does. So we look forward to this discussion, and let me just get it started off. Representative Bass, with regard to foreign policy, it's often said that politics stops at the water's edge. We know that that's not completely true. With regard to Africa, it's more true than not. Can you talk a little about that and talk about some of the initiatives that you have going with your colleagues, both in your own party and across the aisle? What's going on most recently?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for including me in this conversation. I admire the work of the Institute tremendously, and it's an absolute honor to be involved. One thing I think is so important for people to know, and you know this, Senator, the discussions, the legislation, the hearings around Africa is a very bipartisan issue. And so I will say that just like in the United States, around the world, we're all focused on COVID and making sure that COVID does not really devastate the continent. And the continent overall has done pretty well, with a couple of exceptions, South Africa and Egypt being two of the exceptions. So we're dealing with the crisis at hand. However, long-term, looking at Africa from the point of view of investment, talking about the continent as a partner, as opposed to what the tradition has been, which is viewing Africa as a charity case. And that is how we have approached the continent, focusing on conflicts, focusing on humanitarian issues, but not really focusing on long-term investment. And right before you left the Senate, I believe the DFC was formed, the Development Finance Corporation, which I believe will be a real catalyst toward U.S. companies, U.S. businesses investing in the continent of Africa.
Well, great. Thank you, Cindy. You've been going to Africa for many decades. You've seen the continent emerge from wars and famine. A lot of conflicts obviously persist, but there are opportunities as well. Cindy, what do you think are the most important things that the United States can do? And if you could, go on and talk about what Representative Bass just talked about, how Africa can be a partner. It's not just a humanitarian or a charity case, as was said. What do you think is the most important thing that the U.S. can do right now?
Well, number one in my mind is to focus on women, women's rights, the issues that face women. We know all the stories that come out of Africa. Unfortunately, they're all bad. But I think that we, as the United States of America, should focus on women. They are the backbone of African society, and since the informal sector of African economies is so important, women play an outsized role in the economics, and they're not really counted as part of that. I mean, they're kind of looked over. I mean, it's expected, but not praised in any way. So I guess my belief would be to do more with our partners in Africa, to involve women in the economics, more women, certainly women in politics. I mean, that has been something the Institute has been very involved in Eastern Congo, was training and helping women understand the process, understand their rights, and also the ability to actually participate in the process. That's been a difficult road, but we've had some successes with it. The more leadership in my mind and the more opportunity in my mind for women, and this includes women's health, it includes women's, not just the economic portion of it, but women's health in many cases is very undersized. And so all of those together, in my opinion, would be probably some of the most important things that we could do for the continent.
Well, thank you. Ben, you've been involved in Eastern Congo for over a decade. You've taken on what is perhaps one of the world's poorest countries, country that has severe challenges with good governance. What got you involved, and talk a little about your work with the Eastern Congo Initiative?
Sure. Well, I agree. Obviously, it's a country that has a lot of difficulties. One of the things that got me involved is, and first of all, I want to say thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to talk to you, Senator Flake. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, everybody. It's a real honor to be here, participate, and yes, I know that you sometimes bristle when Hollywood stars.
Not with you.
I understand no reality stars were available today, so I'm. Anyway, I got involved because precisely what you said, which is one of the most challenged places on the continent. And initially, when I got involved, and of course, Cindy's been involved in this part of the world, since the mid '90s. So is the preeminent, expert in that regard. But having spent more than a decade there, initially it was prompted, but there was the war that happened in Congo, and the degree to which the country was destabilized was such that even many NGOs weren't willing or interested to work there. And at the time, there was a lot of interest in having various celebrities participate in various capacities in certain causes. And I certainly understand the cynicism around that. And there's undeniably a degree of disingenuousness that comes with some of that, both on the part of actors and the part of those who are not. But in fact, what I thought was, well, here's a place where other people aren't willing to go. Other people aren't doing much work aside from Cindy. Really, there was nobody of any particular with the ability to sort of generate any interest or enthusiasm on the part of the world community or the press in terms of paying attention to what was a profound and significant humanitarian crisis. You're talking about a war that cost millions of lives and from war-related causes, and I thought, well, here's a place that I could do some good. But one of the things I wanted to do was precisely not be that person that is the celebrity who comes and testifies and spends 45 minutes looking over talking points and then sits down and regurgitates them, because it's well, for one thing, it's just not effective. It's inauthentic and doesn't work. So, with the help of Whitney Williams, who's been instrumental in this, when we put together a board of really impressive people, including Mrs. McCain, and started really doing the research that was necessary. And I guess principally, making a very long story short, after a lot of research and a lot of analysis, we discovered that the people doing the best work oftentimes were those who were a part of the community. We're not sort of bringing models from elsewhere and imposing them on communities which they neither understood or had any real familiarity with. And second of all, I'm just a fundamental believer in the interconnectedness of human beings. And I would say that's not a very outlandish notion, particularly now, given that we see, COVID doesn't recognize national borders. And the United States historically has invested and spent an awful lot of money in taxpayer money, the money that our citizens earn in other countries, in fostering our values, in promoting democracy, in diplomacy, in military action. We came to believe, as we were spending money through USAID and other organizations, it could be spent more effectively or less effectively. And one of the really lovely things I have to report is after 10 years, I've found that what is important to say now and was important to say at these congressional hearings, one of which I had the honor of testifying in front of Senator McCain, and was that there are real success stories that are happening. And in particular, we've learned a lot of lessons, and we've learned about what works, and we've learned how not to spend money frivolously, how not to treat Africa as a charity case, how to in fact build a constituency of people around who recognize the issues that are happening on the continent as no different from those that are happening. I don't view anyone as more different from me than those who live on another street, or Texas is from Arizona. I mean, here we are, we're all people, and the idea that one can sort of ignore or discount the suffering of another because they have a different passport seems outmoded at best. And that if we're going to spend our money, and I think we should, because we've always been a country that, while not perfect, has believed in trying to set an example and to try to foster our values and promote democracy, and also has believed, and this has been a particular belief, and I think a very smart belief on the part of the Republican Party, that if other countries do well economically, we'll do well economically, and understanding the interconnected nature of the world economy. And that is a very long answer to a simple question. Is why get involved? A, it's one of the hardest places to work and the places that needed it the most. B, our fates are inexorably tied. C, we want to help people see that it wasn't just people lying on their back with flies in their eyes, but in fact, there's an incredibly vibrant, powerful, dedicated community of people who were working very assiduously on their own behalf to solve their own problems, and see that there were ways in which we could actually help. Principally, initially, involving facilitating communication between, for example, coffee farmers and those who in the international market who bought coffee, and helping them, get their build their capacity to grow coffee to the point where they could sell it to those people and thus increase their income. And we've sort of moved on quite a bit from there, but that was the initial impetus.
Well, thanks. Karen, can you talk a little about our work with other international organizations, whether it's the UN or other countries on a bilateral basis or multilateral? I had the good fortune in 1989 through 1990 spending a year in the country of Namibia when Resolution 435 in the Security Council was implemented. And I got to see the value of that kind of cooperation between what was then the so-called Western Contact Group, but also the UN Security Council in imposing, finally, 10 years late, Resolution 435, which made it possible for Namibia to become independent. What kind of work is being done right now between the US and UN organizations or other multilateral groups?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, let me just say that I was so excited that President Biden appointed Linda Thomas Greenfield as U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. And I know, Senator, Linda, and I would imagine our other speakers as well, Cindy and Ben. She has been an Africanist, has been ambassador to African countries. And so I think we have the tip-top representative in the UN in regard to Africa. And that a lot of what the Security Council deals with involves Africa. and also the peacekeeping that is led by the United Nations. The majority of the peacekeeping missions are on the continent of Africa. So I think we are well positioned there, and our role in the United Nations is so critical. And I'm glad that we will be stepping up our involvement, including the support of those peacekeeping missions. But, you know, when you mention the international front, I want to detour for a minute and share with you an experience I had last year when I chaired the Congressional Black Caucus, when, you know, the whole country was dealing with, actually we still are, the George Floyd case. I received a call from all of the ambassadors from the European Union, and they were undergoing at the time, and I imagine it still is the case, their own kind of look at policing and their population, and that brings them to their relationship with their former colonies. So we are talking about the Congo, and you have Belgium now that is really looking back and saying, wow, you know, what our history with the Congo has been is not very pretty. Now maybe it's time for us to look at this. So I actually raised it with Secretary Blinken. Wouldn't it be amazing if the United States and the EU together, instead of competing, because, you know, a lot of times we are competing when it comes to the continent of Africa in terms of foreign aid, but also in terms of business opportunities, trade agreements, et cetera. But what if we all came together and said, let's look at the infrastructure of Africa, whether we are talking about healthcare, education. It's tough to say you want to invest in a country and there's not roads to take goods to market. So how is it that we have provided foreign aid for so many decades, but 2/3 of the continent doesn't have electricity? Senator, you remember President Obama's initiative, Feed the Future and Power Africa, which was beginning to change the paradigm away from direct aid to helping the countries build their own capacity. So the slogan out of the African Union, you know, is trade, not aid. And so that's the other body that I think that we could pay a tremendous contribution to, and that is helping to strengthen, uplift, provide technical support to the African Union, as well as to the new Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. All of that helps lift up all of the countries on the continent.
Great, thanks. Cindy, your husband, John McCain, was all about America not looking inward, but to forming alliances and to working with other countries. What opportunities exist and what have we done recently with regard to Africa to make sure that that we not only have trade agreements or do humanitarian work, but that there are alliances that will help us elsewhere with the world. I just have one experience before you say that. It made me think about it when Representative Bass was talking. A few years ago, Chris Coons and I and a few others went to Zimbabwe. And as a matter of protocol, you always ask for a meeting with the head of state. And sometimes you hope that he doesn't grant it. It was Robert Mugabe at that time, just a few months actually before he left. But we had a long, tortuous evening with him, and he was, just going on and on about every American leader, every British prime minister, and others who had wronged him and wouldn't meet with him at the UN and whatever else. And finally, I'd had enough, and I said, "Well, hey." George W. Bush, after he had just trashed him, I said he was, had something to do with PEPFAR, and it really helped in Southern Africa. And he stopped for a minute. I'll never forget. It was a long pause, and he said, "I'll give you that." And I couldn't wait to come home and tell former President George W. Bush that he'd been praised by Robert Mugabe. But these kind of alliances, they mean something, and they help us as well in terms of being able to cooperate on security issues, intelligence gathering, and other things. Can you talk a little about that, Cindy?
Well, you're absolutely right about the alliances and not just the importance of them internally, but externally as well. If I can back up just a little bit here. one thing I would like to mention is that we have no alliances, we have no opportunities, we can't do anything unless we remind ourselves that China and Russia have a great deal to do with what's going on inside all of the African continent, and not in a good way. And so I think that's an issue that certainly the African Union needs to deal with. But more importantly, we as Americans need to make sure that we are involved in Africa, and that we do stay involved in with our alliances, with our investment, et cetera. Because if we don't, we're going to wind up with two countries that will destabilize, in my opinion, destabilize most of Africa. You talk about the alliances in general here. We're always stronger when we work together. I mean, that's just plain and simple. There's strength in numbers and strength in the ability to listen and care about what's really going on. And that's very true with alliances, and especially in Africa. We need to also, in my opinion, continue our relationship with partners that defend democracy and freedom. Those, not just in Africa, but around the world. Those issues alone can help stop and present a difference in what's good and bad, and what they might see their future as you know. It's very exciting when you can see free and fair elections anywhere on the continent of Africa, and that has happened. But then you see examples like what's going on in Ethiopia right now. And that's where I believe our alliances and our ability to have alliances have failed us. I know there's many other parts of Africa too, but we've got to work together on all of these levels to stop or counter authoritarianism, most generally, because as we see the results of that, and your meeting with Mugabe is a perfect example of it. That's a great story, by the way. And I also think that those of us that are involved and do care, and I'm not suggesting anyone doesn't care about Africa, but I've spoken to groups, and I know all of you have, where you begin to talk about Africa and their eyes glaze over, and they basically either leave the room or just or give you a hopeless look, saying we can't work here. They're too far gone. There's nothing to be gained by this. But I think putting good people and from all kinds of alliances and making sure that we do work together is the exact right example and the right thing to do about, as Ben said, about human beings that are just like us, only they have a different passport. And if I might say also, with regards to Hollywood testifying, I had an opportunity to both watch and testify with Ben several times. And when I first began to know Ben a little bit, I had the same thing. I thought, oh my God, we're going to parachute in, take a picture, and leave. Mm-hmm. And I'm just grateful that the kinds of things that Ben and of course Karen Bass have done on the continent of Africa, and their deep caring for the people is really inspiring. And so I found in Ben certainly that someone that not only understood the issue, but that was very, very, very deeply caring about it. And so I just wanted to thank him for that, because he changed my mind about Hollywood.
Well, thank you, Cindy. That's quite significant. I mean, your mind may have been changed back subsequent to that, but at least it's very grateful. Those are kind and flattering words. Thank you very, very much.
Well, Ben's parachute jump into Africa has lasted over a decade now, so that's one long descent. So that's why he knows so much about it. When I say that we cringe at Hollywood people coming in, members of Congress love it. Actually, and finally get somebody to the hearings that wouldn't be there otherwise.
I think there's an appropriate amount of cringing and loving.
I know this is off topic, but I remember walking behind my husband and Ben in a corridor coming out of the Senate, one of the Senate buildings. And all of a sudden you hear this clatter of high heels running behind us. John got the biggest kick out of that because all these women were trying to see Ben. And John for a moment, he thought, oh, it could be me. And it wasn't. It was clearly not John, but it was hysterical.
We've all had that realization.
Let me say to that, that was one of the great days of my life. The honor of the time that your husband shared with me, his profound humanity, decency, integrity, and heroism was evident in everything he did, the way he treated me when I testified, the way he spent his time with me. And this is a guy who no doubt knows that I've helped a lot of Democrats lose a lot of elections. So this is not somebody but he was the very epitome of decency, kindness, humanity, civility, and a man who understood that one doesn't have to make a mortal enemy or an evil person out of somebody who happens to disagree about what you think the top marginal tax rate should be, for example. And that, in fact, that is deeply counterproductive. And he didn't live that or demonstrate that by words. He did it by actions, and he did it with actions without cameras around. He did it through character, not just as a prisoner of war in Vietnam and all the ways everybody knows, or the kind of husband and father he was. He just demonstrated in every small action that he took, which to my mind was a great lesson in integrity. I was profoundly humbled by it, and I just want to say how grateful and honored I am to have had the opportunity to spend.
That's very kind. Thank you. That's very kind. We all miss him.
He always told me he married up. So there you go.
Well said. Ben, you talked a little about you described Eastern Congo Initiative as being involved in two things: grant making, but also advocacy. You talked about some of the grants in terms of coffee production, making sure they can get it to market. Talk a little about the advocacy side. What are you advocating for, both in the Congo and elsewhere, that is needed for these groups, these individuals to succeed?
Well, one of the things that I'm advocating for most broadly is just to develop a different kind of perception of Africa. If you have any real value as in terms of being able to use a microphone or a loudspeaker and project to a broad group of people, is to help share your understanding of something with them. And I mean, it may be a little bit too complex to explain to a broader audience, but I will mention here that, this notion that we've thrown a lot of aid at Africa and nothing's worked is a profound and dishonest way of looking at the situation. What Europe and North America have in fact done is extracted a great deal of wealth from Africa, disenfranchised Africans, oppressed them, even in Congo, for example, the only country ever owned by a human being, which was King Leopold in the 1900s, during which the ownership period of which country 10 million Congolese died, and a gigantic amount of wealth in terms of rubber was extracted for the purposes of the advancement of the economy of Europe during the Industrial Revolution. That alone so far dwarfs all the aid ever spent on Africa in its history. So it's extremely disingenuous to suggest that somehow we're frittering away all this money and they're not doing anything with it. That's just dishonest. What we've done historically and continue to do, and when I say we, I include the Chinese who are making unfair deals with with the Africans to extract minerals today, or the Russians, and so forth. That historically, this kind of exploitation is what in fact has continued to happen. And a small amount of aid has been spent. Granted, some of it not spent very well. And one of the reasons that I want to advocate is to develop a sense that this is not a hopeless place. And by the way, my faith compels me to try seek humility. And in the search for humility, I have to recognize that we have our own governance issues in this country before we cast aspersions on the governances of others. So, there is no country that is immune to corruption or to people who seek power at the expense of what is right. And therefore, I think it's not really an effective argument to say, well, you can't deal with this country because there's poor leadership. Because what if we have poor leadership? Should we then be abandoned? Should we give up on ourselves? No, clearly not. What we want to advocate for and explain is the best way to do aid, and to do it in a way that uses models that have been really successful in our society. And principally, that is reflected now in a new project we have called ASILI, where we combine traditional philanthropy with what are basically market principles, okay? You develop a form of philanthropy that ultimately is not philanthropy, but is sustainable business practice. Requires an initial investment from an investor, and anybody who's ever been hit up for money can tell you that when you ask a group like whoever they may be, how much money do you need? They say more, and you say, well, how long you need it for? They say, how long you got? And that answer is not particularly satisfying, and those metrics don't make a lot of sense. So what we say is, what we found with the Cilia is they said, listen, we want to provide clean water and healthcare, which we believe are basic human rights to people, so that the foundation of their country can begin to flourish and prosper. Because it's very difficult to criticize people for not being able to get their acts to flourish in other ways if they haven't access, if they can't prevent themselves from getting infections, or they can't get clean water, or if, as Cindy mentioned, mostly it's women who have to walk 6 hours to get water. So Cilia has developed a way to deliver clean water and to deliver healthcare to Africans, requiring an initial investment from a donor of a certain amount of money, not a huge amount of money, and after which we discovered that in fact the Congolese can afford to pay Congolese doctors and nurses, and in fact in many cases are already paying that amount to. There are people who lay on hands. There's a Chinese machine that will print out your medical history for your medical problem. In other words, they're paying all sorts of other sources, but there aren't Western medicine, and that most people can actually afford $3 or $4 a month for healthcare. It can be provided for that amount, and in fact can be sustainable forever. The problem with philanthropy as it's existed primarily is that you're sort of depending on when the white trucks show up or when they don't. And it could just go away overnight, and that's not sustainable and that's not practical. B, there's a lack of dignity in the sense that you're just a donee, you're a recipient. You have no dignity, you're just lucky to get what we give you. And therefore, you're not in a position to help people understand how best to help you rebuild your society. Rather, what Cilia provides, what we provide in partnering with Cilia, what we recognize, Brem recognized initially, and Ward is a brilliant, smart guy who has taught me a lot, is that the dignity of being a customer is one of the things that we recognize in this country. And one of the things, for example, you feel as though you paid for a good, you're entitled to speak to the manager if you're not being treated properly. And so that sense of deserving to be treated appropriately that comes with being a customer has made a profound difference. So part of this advocacy is to set, the advocacy I want to do is to take this model and the model of, for example, providing grants to who are primarily women coffee growers, driving that number into the tens of thousands and tripling these women's income, as well as saying, look, this can happen. It's possible to function this way. The Cilia clinics are clean, they're beautiful. I drink the water. I would take my children to the healthcare. We're providing that. And by the way, once you've made that investment, it's over. That's it. It's done. That's the clinic you invested in. It's going to get paid for. It's going to outlive you and me. And it's going to continue to exist because it's going to function profitably based on what we've learned about what is successful about the business model in the United States. So the combination, the hybrid of those models, we think is radical, interesting, revolutionary, important, and we hope to share that with people so that they might also adopt a similarly approached direction toward philanthropy that recognizes the necessity of people's being provided with dignity, and also recognizes that, this catchword of, and some people, Ward hates when I use it, but I do think sustainability is important. I think, I know it could become meaningless through overuse, but the fact that something can exist and continue and go on long after, something is not the cause of the day is very, very, very important, because you can't ask people to believe in something that might disappear overnight at the whim of some donor in Silicon Valley who decides, no, strategically, we're going to be involved in something else, So I'll stop filibustering.
That's awesome. Going on from that, kind of talking about business models going forward, I mentioned I was in Africa in the 1980s when the whole, our foreign policy was dominated by the Cold War and playing off these countries against each other, and just the battle to try to woo them to the West, and the Soviet Union was trying to woo them to their model. We have something, I wouldn't say similar, but we have a bit of a contest today, Representative Bass, with China. Can you talk a little about that and why it's important that America not cede its role in Africa, its leadership role? Why is it important for us to be in Africa in that regard with regard to China?
Well, absolutely. I think it's important to look back at that history because I do think that there's examples where we weren't exactly on the right side of an issue or a country because we were primarily worried about the Cold War situation with the Soviet Union at the time. But you know, you and all of us know this because we spend time in Africa. We've worked on these issues for a long time. The Africans would prefer to work with us. I always say that we need to step up. I agree with the problems with China. We all know that in terms of the debt, the quality of work, the corruption, the workforce, bringing labor over. I remember being in the DRC and seeing no one employed around except for the Chinese workers that were there building roads instead of the Africans building roads. That's something that happens in inner city America where people are upset that you see work going on all around you, but the people that live in the community don't have access to those jobs. So I can only imagine what the Africans feel like when somebody comes from a whole nother part of the world and they're unemployed. So I think that there's a lot that we can look at the relationship with China and Africa that is problematic. So we need to be there. So I think our problem is we are not there. Now, granted, the circumstances are different with state-sponsored industries where we don't have that here, but we could certainly step up our game. And I think that, Ben, you illustrated exactly what I was saying in terms of a new paradigm of looking at how we provide assistance to countries where the idea is to work yourself out of the job, not just stay there forever, but to assist the African countries, the villages, et cetera, to do for themselves and to exchange our technology and our know-how, but to work our way out of it. And I think that that's what we need to do. Now, I think we have a tremendous opportunity with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, where the African countries have agreed to trade with each other. We can provide our technical expertise in how to do that. We can support them doing that because to the extent that the African countries, especially the smaller countries, can trade with each other, it's very hard for them to trade with us, some of the smaller countries, because they can't rise to the scale that you would need to have in our businesses here. But you know that the African continent is divided into regional economic communities. And if you look at that, how they pull their resources and their markets, et cetera, can get them to reach the scale where they can do business with us. So I think that there's a lot more that we can do. It's fine to criticize, but we need to step up.
Cindy, what is the future of Africa?
Oh gosh, I have great hope. I just believe by implementing the things certainly that Representative Bass has said and Ben has mentioned and others is exactly the right step forward. And I'm very hopeful because I also believe that the involvement of women will make a huge change across Africa. And I think an investment in that particular arena is most important. Again, because at least the countries that I've seen where women are in charge, they're pretty good countries. So, but I'm very hopeful about it. To answer your question, I'm very hopeful. I have always been hopeful because I see the beauty in these people and the wonderment of their land and everything that's there. How can you not be hopeful, in my opinion?
Ben, I really enjoyed your last time you testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee when I was there, I think in 2017 or 18. If you were to testify before that same committee today and talk about Congo and the broader region or Africa in general, what would you say are the biggest challenges and where should the United States be spending its time and resources?
I would say that for one thing, I would be very grateful to be invited. I would invite as many members of Congress to come and visit Africa and see for themselves what works and what doesn't. And I think they would find and see the ways that the American taxpayer dollars are being spent and how they're being spent effectively, how they're being spent ineffectively. I think that in and of itself would be quite revelatory. I would point to things such as the telecom industry, where, for example, I can get a cell phone signal in the hinterlands of Eastern Congo, where there are barely roads and where it's very difficult to travel. And here I am in this fancy part of Los Angeles, and I have no bars. So clearly, when the profit motive is involved, you know, people, if you feel as though you can make money, which the Chinese clearly do and assiduously have been pursuing, and I think it should be, I would also testify to the fact that the Chinese have proven to be onto something. You know, cultivating these relationships, chasing after these resources, developing these relationships is going to be of long-term value to China. And right now we're just giving it away. We're allowing them to dominate these relationships unchallenged. And once they're controlled, it'll be a further advantage to China and disadvantage to our country and our economy. And I would say that again, at the risk of repeating myself, you know, when you look at, for example, cell phone companies, and I think the first, you know, African billionaire was in fact made by building cell phone towers, that if you can make money, you will get people to invest money. If there is profitability, and to fuse investment, profitability with, and underneath the umbrella of philanthropic approaches in terms of, I mean, I hesitate to even call it philanthropy when it's just providing basic services. I mean, is Walmart a philanthropic company, or are they just a place where people can buy the basic goods that they need? Walmart's done fairly well business-wise, you know, and that there is money to be made, there is opportunities to be had. There, you have a country full of a continent, in my experience. I've been to Congo 15 or 16 times and to about 10 or 11 other countries. So I'm not an expert on Africa as a whole, but what I have seen in every country I've visited is people who are willing to work very hard, desiring to work hard, have a sense of entrepreneurship, a willingness to invest themselves in their community, and simply being exposed to the opportunities to do so, they'll jump on them. And so I would encourage Congress to approach that, to find USAID, for example, to pursue public-private partnerships in the way that they have, and the aggressive and smart way that they have, in example, you know, using ECI as an example with Vasily and with our projects with Starbucks and Theo Chocolates and so forth, and recognize that we're sort of all in this together, and that we recognize that the way we spend our money reflects our values, and we want those values to reflect well on us. And even from a purely selfish perspective, we want security, we want economic viability, we want health and prosperity. All of those things are benefited by our engagement and being active in Africa and the rest of the world. Not in a wasteful way, not in a way that fritters away money, but in a wise way. So I would lastly encourage Congress to be thoughtful and really examine what has worked and what hasn't, and look at what models may work well in the future. And I would encourage them to stay involved, and I would tell them that I'm going to continue to try to build a constituency around people who are interested in this topic and cultivate other people to do so. And it has been my honor to be inspired by Ms. McCain, and I will continue to work in the vein in which she has, diligently, and on behalf largely of women who, I have to say, I don't know what this says about us men, but it is factually correct that women, countries that are run primarily by women, societies that are run by women, tend to prosper more. So, well, there you have it. And then I would thank them, and as I thank you for being a part of this this forum.
Thanks, Ben. Karen, in the minute we have left, I'll give you the same question I gave to Cindy. What's the future of Africa?
I think the future of Africa is bright. I mean, you're talking about one of the fastest growing continents on the planet, over 1 billion people, with a young population that represents the overwhelming majority. And so I think it is very bright. It's tremendous opportunity. But I do think that we need to come together in the world, not just the United States, but all of the places in the world that are benefiting off of the incredible resources that are still on the continent, and say, how do we make it prosper even further? And I would agree with Cindy 150% that women are key to that. And one of our best initiatives from USAID focuses on developing women business leaders and Cindy, I don't know if you've ever been to one of their meetings.
Oh, they're wonderful.
The way, and many of those individual women have developed to scale to do business with our companies. And then I watch them all share their resources together so that other businesses could prosper. But I think that Africa needs to focus on its health infrastructure, education infrastructure, electrical, roads, all of that. And that is also where the world can come together, help the African countries so that they don't need us any longer. They can be like Korea. Korea was very dependent on the international foreign aid for quite a while, and now it's the exact
They're
opposite.
selling us television. If I may add, Congresswoman, I think you make a very astute point. And smart businessmen look for opportunities to invest. Think about how much money has been created in China over the last 40 years.
Yeah.
China was, and India was, relatively in the same place Africa was. A lot of billionaires and millionaires have been manufactured. My business alone, they're building before COVID, 40 or 50 movie theaters a week. People can't wait to get into business with China because of the growth and wealth opportunities that are there. They exist to a lesser extent in India, clearly, and neither of the Indian subcontinent nor China have the natural resources that Africa has, nor frankly, do they exceed Africans in any measure in terms of dedication, desire to work, willingness to work, desire to create prosperity. There, just simply put, there is a tremendous amount of value to be created by investing in Africa. And one of the things Africa has suffered from is not only the opposite of investment, which is being plundered, but a lack of investment. And I think once people come to understand that there's money to be made, frankly, and it's in their own self-interest if they are managing a fund to invest in Africa, you'll start to see massive growth in the way that you've seen it in China.
And if you think about it, in all of those places, they had issues with governance, with corruption, with conflicts, but we never viewed those areas as hopeless or helpless.
Thank you. That's a great note to end it on. We are so fortunate to have McCain Institute so interested in this topic. Cindy, thank you for always ensuring that this is at the top of the list. We are also very fortunate to have Karen Bass in a leadership role with regard to Africa. Thank you.
I'm sorry you couldn't get him from The Bachelor, but next time we'll.
and Ben, we parachuted into Africa when he did it 10 years ago. We're glad the parachute got caught somewhere, and he's been involved ever since and stuck. And thank you for all that you do and to make the example that you set and for the good work that you do. Nice. So thank you everyone for participating, and we'll sign off.